Okay, it's our second screencast for today. I want to talk a little bit more about the UBD units after looking at the comprehensive unit plan format and the rubric. So specifically for this course, uh, the unit that you are creating is not necessarily something that you would teach in its entirety during your field placement for this course. So twice during your time at Elon, both in the methods course and in student teaching, you will have the experience of designing the unit and then teaching all of it. For this course, the idea is more for you to practice the design process than the actual implementation process. So you may, depending on your field placement, be able to teach one or more of the lessons, but that is not required of you. So you uh, don't even necessarily have to wait to find out from your cooperating teacher what the subject matter is going to be in your class. So just work in your content area. If you have been given your placement and been in touch with your teacher already and know the specific courses, you could design the mini unit around the course, but that is not required and would not impact how your unit is assessed at all. In thinking about the unit, I just want to reiterate in terms of your goals that less is more. So do not bite off more than you can chew. This is a common rookie mistake. And so this is a mini unit, 5 lessons. Do not try and teach a ton of content in that short time period. And as you sort of try and figure out, well, how do I narrow it down then? Use the framework that is in Wiggins and McTighe to try and think about what's the most important stuff and what maybe can be addressed um, in other ways or at other times in the curriculum. So we will do some workshopping of your unit plan drafts, and so you will be able to get some feedback from peers and from me about maybe which goals are most useful and the quantity of goals that you've picked. In terms of the assessment, so from the chapters that you read for today, you know that Wiggins and McTighe encourage the scrapbook approach to assessment, which would be that there are multiple vignettes over time that help inform your assessment of the student's learning. So I did give you uh, the the parameters for the unit that you can have one day in which you do a bigger assessment. But over the 5 lessons, I would like to also see some smaller formative assessments planned, and those could be as simple as maybe an exit ticket one day or a quick little 3 or 4 question entrance ticket. But do uh, plan on aiming towards that scrapbook approach, keeping in mind also that just like with the goals that you can't tackle too many goals, don't you can't tackle too much assessment in a mini unit. Now, in terms of how long a particular assessment activity will take, so this is one of the challenges of teaching that no one ever 100% solves. So, there is some guesswork that goes into figuring out how long an assessment will take. And so, one of the things that you can do is try and work some of the problems to see how long they would take you. Now, you're probably going to have to add some time on, though, because you're going to be able to progress through them faster. So, this will be another thing that you may want to get feedback on from your peers when you workshop your unit is how long they think a particular type of assessment would take the students to do. Now, thinking about the learning and teaching activities that you're going to design into the unit, so let's just reiterate that you are designing both learning activities and teaching activities. So in your lesson plans, if all I see is what the teacher is going to do, that's problematic, right? So learning occurs through the actions of the learner. You, the teacher, influence that a lot, but you do need to describe in the lesson plan what activities the learners will be engaged in that will help them reach your learning goals for them. And just like it's hard to figure out how long an assessment is going to take, it is also very hard to figure out how long learning and teaching activities take. So pacing is a challenge that teachers are constantly battling. So you learn a lot through experience. You can gradually begin to sort of guesstimate how long certain activities will take, but it's never foolproof. And some days a group of students will be more talkative, and some days they'll be less talkative. So the discussion that you thought might go 10 minutes one day will peter out after 5 minutes, and another day you won't be able to shut them up for 20 minutes or something like that. So, um, take your best guess at when you design the lesson. Generally, it's probably safer to assume that discussions are going to go a little bit longer than you might estimate at first. Um, but again, stuff like that is down to the class and the dynamic within the class. So uh, again, when we workshop your unit, this will be something to ask your peers about and ask me about. Do you think this is a realistic time period for this activity? Okay, I want to go over some of your questions from your HWQs about chapters 7 and 8. So I've kind of grouped some of the questions, but this first one I thought would be a good one just to address. So the UBD process is sort of a formula that is uh, a bit complicated sort of the first time you use it, but it is something that becomes easier over time. And really, it's the principles behind the understanding by design process that I think are most important. So, we are going to make you use the formula to some extent to create an evidence in part because we know that the state is going to like it, but um, 10, 15, 20 years down the road into your career, the principles behind the process are what's most important. Having learning goals in mind when you start planning your curriculum is a key principle, and then being sure that the assessment and the instruction are aligned with those learning goals. If you remember that, then that's going to be the key takeaway. And it does get easier with time. Most things about teaching get easier as you've done them a few times. So these next three assessments or next three questions all kind of get at the same issue. So performance assessments and some of these other more intriguing approaches to assessment sound really attractive. But several of you guys were sort of asking about, well, what about closed-ended questions? What about factual questions or more traditional approaches? And uh, Wiggins and McTighe would readily admit that those are sometimes appropriate to certain learning goals. So, you are trying to get at big understandings, but there's also some knowledge that can be foundational to reaching those understandings. And so if you have some knowledge related learning goals, then some of the questions are going to be more factual to make sure that the students are learning those foundational pieces of knowledge. So the tendency is, of course, traditionally that schools do uh, too much or only the sort of traditional closed-ended factual type assessments. And so Wiggins and McTighe are going to emphasize the other types of assessment that are new or different, but it's not to say that we have to throw out everything old and that came before. So if you're only ever doing traditional assessment, that's problematic. Um, but if you're never doing any kind of traditional assessment, that might also be a problematic uh, issue. So these questions all relate to the challenge of validity. Um, are you supposed to constantly challenge the validity of your assessments? Yeah, so this kind of gets to the second question: is it possible to avoid the challenge of validity? And the the answer is no. It's a challenge. No one has figured out the solution. So this is part of teaching that assessment is just difficult, right? We cannot sort of X-ray our students' brains and find out what exactly is going on in there. So assessments are always going to be somewhat imperfect instruments. And so, yeah, we are constantly sort of interrogating them and figuring out how to tweak and improve them. So it seems as if an assessment can never be perfect. That's probably true. So teaching is a lot about pursuing perfection. It's not usually about reaching perfection. So we do sort of messy work, and that can be fun. And it means that there's always room to improve. Um, so another piece of the sort of assessment being messy and imperfect is this final question about how do you help prevent grading students' papers more harshly. So this is a sort of a good general point in that we as humans are imperfect instruments. So when we go to assess our students' work, uh, we are not sort of scientific machines. So you know, even if we don't have a rubric, there's oftentimes room for some subjectivity to slip into the grading process, or just we get tired, or we're in a bad mood, or there's all sorts of things that can influence our assessment. So that's just good to keep in mind. We're not going to spend a ton of time addressing those issues in this course because you will have the assessment course, but just a good point to keep in mind. Okay, and so the last two sets of questions. So these two questions are sort of related. Two of you asked about individualized assessment. And so Wiggins and McTighe would be supportive of individualized assessments as long as they produced acceptable evidence of the desired learning goals. There's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one path to the same intended outcome. So as long as it would get you to the same evidence of understanding, then sure, they would be supportive of individualizing assessment. Um, so you could potentially have a rubric that is common, and then there's a variety of different assessment activities that would connect to that same rubric. Um, and then two other questions that were asked about rubrics. So first of all, does every assignment deserve a rubric? Teachers would not have time to sleep, eat. Yeah, there would be no time if teachers designed a rubric for every single assignment they created. So generally rubrics are for more large-scale assessments. And so also with assessments that have most of the questions just have a right or a wrong answer, if it's a more objective assessment, then a rubric may not be necessary. And then this later question is about sort of the analytic rubric, holistic rubric debate. And Wiggins and McTighe do come down on the side of the analytic rubric, and I do understand their rationale for it. Um, and I think it lines up well with their understanding by design framework. Um, but there are a lot of people who also do holistic rubrics, and there's arguments for them as well. So, yeah, if a holistic rubric includes a good quantity of individual feedback, that could, in some cases, be just as effective as an analytic rubric, where all there are some sort of uh, phrases circled on the rubric, and the student doesn't really get as much individual information out of it. So, for Monday, don't forget to read and do the HWQs for chapters 9 and 10. And then, of course, you had this screencast and the other screencast as well.